Welcome back to our growing experiment. We're here with Lindsay, the Superior Gardener. She's going to tell us about her garden and how she got started. So, Lindsay, do you want to give us a little bit of an introduction?
Sure. Thank you for having me. This is a great opportunity to just kind of showcase what I've been up to up here. So, I'm Lindsay.
Motion detected at the driveway.
Sorry, I'm Lindsay. I'm a small business owner. I'm a backyard farmer, a homesteader, kind of a wide range of things going on here. I live in Sault Ste. Marie. I live in the west end of the city, so I'm much closer to Lake Superior. But I am nestled right in between Lakes Superior, Michigan, and Lake Huron. So gardening does have quite the lake effect up here. I've lived here my whole life. I only left once just to go to university. I went down in Southern Ontario actually to Waterloo, University of Waterloo, and then came back as soon as I graduated. I missed it. I missed the air and the trees and the green and the lake. So didn't stay down there too long. I've been gardening as long as I can remember, but it's all self-taught. I didn't have somebody kind of to follow around. I just did a lot of it through trial and error, which is kind of like my university degree. I went to school for biochemistry, so there's a lot of transferable skills with experimenting and hypotheses and figuring out what to do when you make a lot of mistakes. Um, so it's been a fun adventure. I've always collected seeds. As long as I can remember, I didn't not think that there wasn't a reason to when I was growing something. So I've always shared them with my family and friends. But then the pandemic hit in 2020, and I thought maybe I can take a run at this and start a business out of my hobby. So that's kind of how it all started. And it's just snowballed from there. I think it's really important to save seeds and live harmoniously with the land. I mean, it provides so much to us. I like to do whatever I can to give back to it. I also expand my garden a little bit every year. This year, I think it's going to be around, I don't know, 800 square feet now. I started really small, but every year I add about 100 square feet or so, because there's always more stuff that I want to start gardening. I usually have about 150 varieties of veggies and herbs and flowers going on at once. It's all organic, all open pollinated. I don't use any like synthetic fertilizers or chemical pesticides. I'm in zone 4B here. I don't know if it's the same zone as you guys, but so our first and last frost date it's between, I don't know, usually second week of June is for sure okay, and then second week of September when it ends. So there's only about, I don't know, 3 good months of growing. So I like to choose things to grow that work well in our northern climate. So I'm looking for cold hardy stuff. I'm looking for frost tolerant stuff, things with shorter growing seasons, and things that I can also try and overwinter with a few of the things that I do here. So I run a truly a small business. It is just me. I do all of it. I do all of the planting and seed starting and harvesting and website and marketing and everything. But I do have my family that helps me a lot. My husband and my 2 kids. My daughter Mary Jane, she's 10, and my son is 7. So they're pretty helpful when it comes to doing, I don't know, little harvests of peas and helping me with the chickens and the ducks and stuff, making sure they're fed. So we all kind of get it work done together. I love vegetables. I'm team veg, but over the years, my sister's really gotten me to start liking flowers. So I'm starting to venture out into pretty things as well, even though I think vegetables are super pretty. So I'm working on that, and I really love sharing my gardening ways. I think they're just the way that I garden, but they could be viewed as, I guess, unique. I add a lot of square foot gardening, vertical gardening, I have a greenhouse, I have cold frames. I plant because I do succession planting, but also I save for seeds. So there's not always a lot that I can do as well. And then companion planting, because I do plant in a small area, even though I live on about an acre and a half of property, but I jam everything into a small area. So knowing what I can plant close to other plants really helps. And like I mentioned, I have chickens and I have ducks, and I'm also a licensed cannabis grower. So I provide a lot of help and education on growing outdoor cannabis through my social media accounts. So I have really active Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube accounts where I just post quick little tips to help any gardener. I love to help. I think everyone should be gardening. It helps the soul, it helps the mind, it helps the body, it helps everything. And even though our gardening season is quick, it's definitely possible to grow to sustain a family if you can figure out the ins and outs. And it doesn't come overnight, but it eventually starts to become more and more clear as it goes on. So it's kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, that's really great that it's all self-taught, because I even told Jordan, I'm like, she knows so much. I just want to know like what your story is, and it's really crazy that you did that all on your own. That's really amazing, because what you're saying about trying to help people, you've definitely helped us, even like through your social media. Like we get lots of information off you, so that's great.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. That's exactly what I want it there for. And I think a lot of people have this stigma that because we have such a short growing season and the snow's here till April, that it's just, you can't do a lot of the things that you see other gardeners doing in other zones. But we can do it. We can do it.
Yeah, you got to be a little more like a little more creative. And that's where you mentioned all the different sort of modalities that you're using, right? You mentioned, I think, using cold frames. You mentioned doing the vertical gardening. You mentioned going by the square footage. So maybe let's dig into a couple of these things here. So you talked about having like 150 varieties of plants you're growing, basically. So how are you layering these together? How are you companion planting? How are you your square foot planting? How does that all work?
Yeah, so I have little like garden boxes in the garden. So I kind of loosely use the square foot gardening method. That's kind of how I started. I just thought it was so interesting to be able to just break it all down into just 1 square foot and then figure out, how big everything would grow in 1 square foot. So I know I can grow like 1 broccoli in a square foot, but I can also grow like 16 onions in a square foot, right? So figuring out those kinds of things, I don't know, for me, it really helped to just figure out what I can plant with what. So when I first started, a lot of my beds were just 4 feet by 4 feet. And the reason they're like that is because you can reach all of it from any way around it, right? So anything more than a 2 foot gap, then you got to start walking in your bed, and then you're wasting space. So I want to use up all the space I can. And then now my beds have kind of changed. If they're up against a wall or a fence, they're only 2 feet wide. And then I make them as long as I want, but they're only ever 4 feet wide. So I can always reach everything without having to walk in the bed. And that way I can really plant everything right beside each other. And then figuring out, it's taken me a couple of years, but figuring out what I could plant near things. So like I would plant, for instance, my garlic in the center of one of my 4 by 12 beds. So I usually plant between 9 and 12 cloves per garlic per square foot. So there would be, I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but it's for my analytical mind, it kind of works. So I could plant in the entire center of that bed all of my garlic, and then around the outside I would plant things that are just a little bit lower or grow because garlic's gone by, I don't know, end of July, beginning of August. So now I have all that space open again. so I can plant things that would be able to grow. So this year I planted my bush beans around them. So then once the garlic is gone, I can release the bush beans kind of to move into that space a little bit more, because they don't really produce until a little around that time, right? They're starting to around that time. So it's just little things like that, learning that like I can't really put my beets beside my beans because they grow the same height, but I could put corn here, and then I can put something that's smaller, like a nasturtium or like a smaller type of plant that grows smaller beside it. So then they're not competing for that space, but they grow differently, and their roots also grow differently as well. So they're not really competing underneath the ground either.
Yeah, that was that's an idea that I really like. I like that idea of planting a lot of these things close together and using a lot of space. But you mentioned there, you kind of have to look a lot at what your canopy level is and sort of what your root level is to see if those two things work together. Because that's the problem I've got into, is where you plant two things together and you think, oh, well, when I'm pulling this thing out, I'll put this thing in here. And then you got those things are way too tall and they're basically sucking up all the light. And those other things you plant in there, they stay like, tiny.
Exactly. So like for me, companion planting is exactly that, making sure that I'm planting things that are not the same height above the ground and below the ground. Not necessarily like, what just grows well together based on their companionship. For me, companion planting is exactly what you just said.
Yeah, well, I've seen even you've posted a bit about how you plan and the charts you do. So it seems like you spend a lot of time planning.
I haven't started yet this year. It's bad. I'm a little behind. I don't know why. It feels like I could be out there planting soon anyways with the winter we've had, but I haven't started planning yet. So yeah, I got to get down to that pretty quick. But
Yeah.
again, I plan it. I plan it, and it changes and it changes and it changes, and I'll change it even when I get out there in the garden with the plants in my hand. It changes again. So it's always changing.
Okay, so that's something we find for ourselves too. And this year we decided to try to be a little more rigid with our plan. So like, what are the kind of what reasons is it that you have for modifying your plan? Because like, say a modification for a person like you with as much experience as you have, it's a little bit different for say someone like us. Like say someone like us, maybe we get like, oh, maybe we have enough room for one more of these plants that we actually don't have room for, or something more like that. Like that's kind of a change that we'll make. But what's a change that you sort of make while you're in the flow?
It's pretty similar. It's a lot of the times I'm picturing it differently in my head when I'm just looking at it from above, like on a spreadsheet. And I think they'll work well together. But then once I get out there, I realize that there's just not going to be as much space for this type of thing that I wanted to plant, or I forgot that it's going to lose a lot of light. For this one thing that I want to plant, for instance, it's going to lose light in this area and it's not going to get as big as I'd want it to get. So it's not a good idea to put it there. Or I end up having more than I need of something or less than I need of something. So it's a lot of just, juggling a lot and over again.
And then, so with the small business aspect that you got there, are you growing basically like you're growing food to sell, right? You're growing produce.
No, I'm not growing produce. I only grow, okay. I grow produce for my family.
Right.
Enough for us, but I don't sell like my tomatoes at the market or anything like that. Those are all getting eaten by us and preserved and everything by us. But I do plant for seed saving. So a lot of the stuff that I plant, normally like when it's done for you, you'd rip it out because there's no use for it anymore. But for me, I have to leave it in there because they need the seeds to mature. So that makes like succession planting a little bit more challenging here, especially, I don't know, I've tried a fall garden, I guess. I don't know if you guys have outdoors, but it never really amounts to too much. So
yeah, well, this year was fairly mild. It seemed like we had stuff we left like into November and it was fine, like our more cold hardy stuff, and we kind of planned around that a little bit this year. Like we're hoping that we stay mild into those months, because then we'll have like what did we have in our last succession there? We had some more peas out there. We had some Brussels sprouts,
kale,
Yeah.
spinach.
Yeah, a few.
I had like, I think I did 4 rounds of peas this year. This was the first year that I've gotten that many rounds in. So it was definitely a good longer season. It was wet. I don't know, was it really wet there for you guys too? Like I had a lot of mold and stuff at the end of the season, but
Yeah, that was another that was something I meant to ask about too. And I think I had a couple of problems. So like I grow a little bit of cannabis too. Just what you're allowed to grow with the limit or whatever, right? And this year there, I transferred them too late. Like I planted them in the dome and I planted them in the ground because I thought like, oh, I'll get a jump. I'll let them get kind of big and then I'll transplant them. But I didn't really account for like trying to transplant a giant plant like that, the root structure it would have that I was going to be. Like, so basically I killed 4 plants.
Aww.
And well, I brought them back. So I planted them and they looked like awful for a while and then they came back. And then out of the 4 that I transplanted, 2 turned out to be males anyways. And then the 2 that I had left, mold got them. And so I figured it was probably because I stressed them out because of the late transfer. Like this year, I have all my ideas for like when I'm doing my transplants and stuff, so I'm not going to run into that problem again. But so it was the moisture. So what do you do about moisture for like
It's
plants
tough.
that are sensitive to that? Because we had a lot of rain this year. It's not even just your cannabis. It's say let's like your
powdery mildew.
Yeah, powdery mildew. That's exactly what I was going to point out. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's tough. It is really tough. I for cannabis, the mold does become kind of inevitable by the end of the season, because we had such a long season too this year. Normally we're already pulling our cannabis before, like mine's usually out of the ground definitely before November, but it was long this year. It was a long season. So when I do, like I check them every day for mold. I've like shaken the trees every morning. I call them trees because by then they're so big, but I shake them to shake off all that extra dew that's on them. And I've also used like a leaf blowers to try and get the moisture off of them in the mornings. But for the most part, I just watch the plants, and then when I see mold starting, I just cut that completely out of the plant. If you don't, you can lose the plant in like a day. It's happened to me, and it really sucks. So, but yeah, other than that, like while it's growing, I make sure that I keep it really thin in the inside. So like if you're picturing a Christmas tree, but there's nothing in the center of it. So that really helps keep the wind flow through. I've also noticed a big difference from ones that I plant like against like a fence or a greenhouse, as opposed to ones that are just in the middle of the garden. Those ones do way better when it comes to mold. Because the wind can really blow right through them, whereas the other ones get they get mold from not having enough airflow.
Yeah, we're trapped in a corner.
Yeah, but like for what you said, honestly, I think that you didn't do anything. I've transplanted stuff before. Cannabis is it's a weed. It's super hardy. It'll come back even if it looks like crap. But it was a really wet season this year. So I had to pull and if I notice the plant starting to really get a lot of mold spots, I just pull the plant entirely, even if it is a little bit early. I'd rather sacrifice a little bit of THC than lose the entire plant.
Yeah, well, that was another consideration too, where the first year that I grew, I basically ran into the problem of being root bound because it grows way faster than you expect. Like for a person who's never grown cannabis before, it grows crazy big, crazy fast.
Yeah.
And then I bought these big, huge planters for it there last year. And then I don't know if you get like me, but once I start seeing them get big, I start thinking to myself, I'm like, how big can I actually grow one of these things? But then it gets to the point where you can't even maintain it anymore. Like I had to get up on a ladder to trim my plants. So I was keeping the leaves out of there so it wouldn't get mold, which I ended up losing that battle anyways. So like in like say picking like for your cannabis, are you picking say certain strains that you're expecting a certain sort of flowering period on? Are certain ones better for our area? That kind of thing? Because that's the last couple of years when I tried growing, it was just like bag seed, so just seeds people had given me, and I just tried out just to try it out.
Yep.
And this
Yeah.
year, I'm going to actually try to pick a strain and try to make an actual go of it. So, what kind of strains? What kind of? Where do you go?
Yeah, so it's like it's a good task for me to figure that out at the beginning when I want to start every year. I do a lot of research into what I want to grow. So I'm looking for cannabis that flowers in 8 weeks or less. And I'm looking for usually I don't know, I really like indicas, which is actually beneficial because indicas usually grow like a little bit shorter and stockier as it is. So those ones are usually a little bit better for our northern climate. But then it's tricky because you want a shorter flowering period, but also you have to remember the shorter it is, the quicker it's going to flower. So if you want good bud and you want good result, you got to make sure that you're feeding that thing all the time. Otherwise it gets away from you. Like you said, like they grow so quickly, right? And then boom, 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 it's ready and it's done. And you're like, crap, I didn't get to feed it as much as I wanted to, or I didn't get, prune it. I like pruning mine. I keep pushing them down so that they grow wider and wider and stuff, right? So so there's little things like that, like shorter growing seasons are great, but too short, not so good, right? So there's always kind of an upside and a downside to that. But yeah, normally I'm looking for ones that flower by like mid-October at the latest. I've had some that I just love to grow and I know they're not going to finish until like the first week of November. That makes me nervous every year, but I just love to grow them. So those ones I plant them in like big, I have 15-gallon felt pots, so I can pull them into my greenhouse if I need to. If the weather starts getting pretty bad.
Right. And so do you use any autoflower at all, or are you strictly just photo period? And then you're saying that you're staying mostly towards indica, and that's going to have more of that bushy sort of structure. So like you're trying to keep them a little bit smaller so they're a little more manageable. Is there any benefit in, say, starting the plant earlier inside to increase that sort of vegetative period, to make a bigger plant, to make bigger bud, or is that just sort of a waste of time?
No, that's an excellent question. So for I grow photo periods, I like them because they're more forgiving. You can't really you can manipulate the light and you can keep them under your control a lot easier. Autoflowers, they're on a timeline, right? So they're going to bud when they want to bud. You can't do anything about it, and they're done when they want to be done. And for me, that makes it a little bit more nerve-wracking because I got a lot going on all the time. So if I forget about it, then it's not the end of the world if it's a photo period cannabis plant. So for me, I'm usually starting my cannabis for outdoors. My photo period cannabis, you can start it this month if you'd want to. I'll be starting them. Like I've already started some, but I'm using them for different purposes. But I did start some just this week, and I'd say by the beginning of March is a good starting base. You can start them earlier. There's no harm in starting a photo period cannabis earlier. But if you are, I would be pruning those down. So I'd be topping them so that they can split out, and then topping those so you can keep growing it nice and bushy. So by the time you get it outside, it's probably going to be, I don't know, about 1.5 feet tall, but it's going to have a lot of growth on it. So once you get that in the ground, it's going to just take off like a big bush. It'll be like 4 feet wide. It's so nice. So, but for an autoflower, you can't, I'd start those with my tomatoes at the beginning of April. I wouldn't start those early because you can't get them outside to get them to grow fast enough. Our light won't be good enough yet anyways till then. So.
Yeah. And that was a kind of a consideration I wondered too, for when you're trying to figure out like how long it's going to take for your plant to flower. So like the ones I was growing, I didn't know the particular varieties, so I didn't really know how long they were going to take to flower or any of that kind of thing. But like, because when do they really start to change in the flower? Because I noticed it's probably around when we're getting to like 14 hours daylight roughly.
Yeah, it's so.
Uh-oh.
Oh, I'm back. Did it go? Sorry.
You're back.
There. Okay. So I'm actually not, I don't really pay attention to, I'm not the cannabis grower that pays attention to day 35 of the grow, or there you see people talk about that a lot, about all of that. I just kind of go by what it looks like, and you can start to tell. They usually start budding in August. Some start earlier than others, and sometimes I've noticed too, like ones that I think aren't going to start budding until August actually start earlier, or they'll start later too. So it's not always for me, it's not always like an exact science when it comes to cannabis. Maybe it could be. I just go by what it's looking like, but you can really tell the difference when they're about to flower. You could start to see them just kind of change. And then I know, because I also, like this year I didn't, but normally I take clones from those plants before they flower, so that I can keep them as mothers and then grow them again the next year if I really like the strains, so I don't have to start over. But this year I started from scratch, so it's a different year.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the reasons too, where I feel like you could talk about cannabis cultivation for so long, because there's so much to it. Because then you start to put like mother plants, and because like it's one of those things too. It's like when you love gardening, it's kind of like the perfect overlap, because you kind of have quick results from what your inputs are. You have you can see what you change and all that kind of thing, and it's such a customizable thing. Like you're creating a total experience out of this plant you're having this relationship with. It's really cool, and I could talk about like that for forever. And so, anyways, it makes me the harvesting end of it, because this way we can segue into more other stuff too.
Yeah.
So then, say we're getting closer to harvest time. That's something too you got to be watching for. We talked about mold earlier and stuff like that. So they get ready. I've heard people say that they'll check like basically the trichomes. They'll look at the color of them, the sort of amber versus cloudy. Do you do any of that, or how do you sort of judge when it's ready to chop them down?
Yeah, so it is a combination of that. I noticed, so when they flower, they start to get those big, nice buds, and there's like they look like white hairs that start on them. Those white hairs are that's what I'm watching. So those white hairs are going to start to change, and they're going to start to amber and brown. But then there's actually, I look for the trichomes after the white hairs. The white hairs are just a good overall indicator, but for me to really know precisely from like yesterday to today to tomorrow, if I'm going to pull it either one of those days, then I'm looking at the trichomes, which are the tiny little, they look like little pin pricks on the buds. And for those, it's the same kind of premise. So the white hairs start cloudy, milky, like a white color. Then they start to brown and amber. It's the same thing with the trichomes. They start off as like a clear, then they go milky, and then they start to amber. And then once I start to see that ambering color on them, that's when I make the decision to pull it. So it's not an exact science for me. I just, from looking at harvesting over the years, when it looks like I can see a good amount of that ambering color in the trichomes, then that's when I decide to pull the plant, and I pull the whole plant. I don't just harvest. Yeah.
And then when you do that, do you hang the whole plant in total, or do you go into trim right away and then hang?
So I personally like to trim and then hang, but sometimes we have more than one that harvests at a time. And I mean, I could be trimming one plant for 3 days. It's because just of the mere size that they can get to. So if I have more than one plant that's come to harvest at the same time, then I'm forced to just hang them separately. So then I'll cut the plant into smaller branches and hang them, and then just trim as I get to them. But I don't really, I think it's just personal preference. I personally just like to trim before. I feel like the bigger leaves on it give it like more of a hay taste, or like kind of like, I don't know, a different taste, but might just be in my head.
Well, I've heard people say that too, and I've kind of tried both now. This year's harvest, I didn't really get to try out too much of. There was like probably one plant that had some left on it that was okay. And then I also noticed it had a really piney taste, and I wondered, and maybe this is just a silly thing, but so there's a big pine tree in my yard that always gives off lots of pollen. And I wonder if maybe the plant would take on some of that, because I know that there's similar terpenes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered if maybe like some of that terpene profile would get in the plant, or maybe the plant was just covered in pollen and that's why it smelled like the pine tree, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah,
But,
I mean, yeah, it could definitely be. I've had some cannabis that tastes very piney, but that's pretty interesting to know too. I wonder
yeah,
do you
and
know
so
what
as
the
long as
strain
we're
was?
talking about the harvesting and stuff too, so say you're harvesting that, you got that going on, you've got probably a bunch of other stuff you're harvesting all at the same time. Like it must be like a couple month period where you're just like go, go, go.
Also,
I'm still harvesting. So for my
You're
seeds
still-
and stuff too. Yeah, like it goes on forever. There is, yeah. So it is. That's important. That's a good point that you made. That like I have my vegetable garden that I prepare produce for my family, so that we can have stuff into the winter months and into the spring before we can start growing again. But then I also have my small business where I'm growing for seed collection and seed savings. So so there's that aspect as well. And then I have an entire cannabis operation that's going on as well. So there's kind of, and then, yeah, there's a lot going on. And then you throw in, the chickens and the ducks and a lot of stuff. So it becomes a pretty busy time. But there's only so many hours in the day. So we'll get to it tomorrow.
you said that you could sustain yourself with the garden. So are you at a point where you said right now that you eat whatever you've grown in the summer throughout the winter months? So is that something that you strive for, is to only be eating whatever you grow?
Yes, I think it's really important. Like we make our own, we make our tomato sauce, and we're jarring, pickles and peppers and stuff, and freezing. I freeze a lot of of my squashes and pumpkins and stuff too. We freeze a lot of that and spinach. I just think that it's really, it's grown in such a great environment out there. I know exactly all the conditions that it's grown under. I know where the seeds came from. I know, all of it. So there's no unknowns when it comes to feeding my family that food. So the more I can do it, the better it is.
And so, being that you're mindful of wanting to sort of feed your family the whole season long, do you have a lot of those, are you just core staples? Do you have a lot of variety? Because I know overall you have a lot of variety, but are more of your variety of your garden sort of supporting plants? Or are they food? Or what can you say on that?
Yeah, so my kids like certain vegetables, right? So I want to make sure that I'm definitely planting what they want. So we always have to make sure we have peas and beans and carrots for them. And then I have my favorites that I love, not necessarily like they're going to be huge seed sellers, but I love to grow them and eat them. So like beets, and there's a lot of stuff that are not. I make the small business sacrifice to grow for me and the family. We just make sure that we always have those core vegetables in. We're always planting our lettuces and our spinaches and stuff, but then there's always fun things that I want to try, even if they're not meant for my zone. It's a long shot. I still want to try them. I still want to do all that and see what I can get away with and what I can't. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I tried it. So.
I also noticed that you have your children involved a lot when you're in the garden, that kind of thing. Are you taking a lot of opportunities to teach them so that they know what they're doing, so that they know a little bit about gardening? How does that go?
Yeah, they might not necessarily always want to be there, but I think they're learning by osmosis. Any chance I can get to talk about gardening or what's going on I'm going to do it. And unfortunately they're always around. So they're going to hear me talk about it all the time. I have been gardening for so long, and it honestly doesn't get old. It doesn't like seeing your first tomato grow or your first radish sprout up of the season or anything like that. To me, I get so excited every time I see it, and I'm sharing that excitement with them, with my kids, and even though they're like, yeah, mom, we know it's another carrot, like we get it, but like to me, now they know how a carrot grows, right? They know a carrot grows in the ground, whereas I don't know if it sounds like such a simple thing, but there's probably plenty of people that don't really know where carrots grow or how Brussels sprouts grow or anything like that, right? So these are little things that they don't really necessarily know that they're learning, but they know it now when they go out into the world.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those funny things where you just think it's normal because it's normal. You're exposed to it, right? Where
Yeah.
like, a similar thing to that I would think of is like when a person, they say like, oh, I like steak. And you're like, all right, well, here's a cow. Show me where you get steak from. And they got no idea, right? There's no connect. They couldn't say, oh, well, you get some steak here. You can get some steak here. You can get some steak here. I like this kind of steak, They got no concept of that. Like baby carrots. What's a baby carrot? That's not like a thing that grows. Not as far as I know, right?
No, yeah.
I was in the store like, oh, well, they must grow baby carrots. They grow them in little baby carrot nurseries.
Yeah, exactly. So I think they're pretty skilled now, though, in being able to identify, the difference between a radish and a beet, for instance. Like I don't know. I don't think if I asked my neighbor, they probably wouldn't know. So it's little things like that, I think it gives me a little bit of, I smile when I hear it for sure.
Yeah. And then over the pandemic and stuff like that, I imagine, especially because, there was not a whole lot else going on. It was great to have the garden and be around that. And if I'm not mistaken, you had a lot of attention around your garden come the pandemic time, right? So there was a lot of community people having eyes on the garden, being around.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened there? What was that experience like?
I had a lot of garden tours. We had like the local, actually they were here about our chickens and our ducks, the local news because we had them skating on our rink. But it was really nice. It's awesome. I love it. I'd love for everyone to be able to come and just walk through my garden, because of course, I think it's wonderful what we can grow. Like right now it's just a blanket of white, and in 4 months, maybe 5 actually, it's going to be like amazingly green and tall and like an oasis. And it's just crazy to see what everyone can grow in such a short period of time, when it goes from seriously like flat white to like this massive, beautiful green thing. So I would love everyone to come and see it and maybe get inspired and want to do it themselves. And it's totally frustrating. I'm frustrated all the time with gardening, but I know that it's also super rewarding too. So there's always, this push and pull and give and take with it. So,
well, I mean, it must be contagious and around your area there. You have a great attitude with this stuff. And when I hear you talking about it, it really kind of makes me appreciate even having our short season, because even when you're talking about this, this blank white slate that we kind of have laid on the land right now, and you think about in different climates right now, it's still green and lush and tropical. But in a way, it maybe adds a bit of a beauty to our northern landscape because of how short it is and how precious it is. It's a different kind of more fragile beauty that's also paired up with the sort of the absence of that beauty, right? And maybe it's that kind of the absent makes the heart grow fonder in a sort of a sense, right? And like you kind of you exude this passion, which is I think why I know my wife loves your page, and I hear about it all the time. I'm a big fan of your page too. I think
that's so awesome to hear.
You have a great attitude, and it just comes through. It's great to see that you have people coming through to your garden and seeing that, because you're right. We can grow a lot of stuff here. We have a beauty to the land here with what we can grow when we can grow it. It's remarkable.
It is. It really is. It does. Makes I look forward to it all year. See that green again. Yeah,
and it's kind of fun too, because you can try and grow new stuff. So our new thing that we're trying to grow that might die is we're trying to grow a fig tree. We got a fig tree in our greenhouse that we're trying to keep alive, and we'll see
Like
how winters. We're
Like, is it
overwintering it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to hear how that goes. I've tried. It doesn't work for me here, but I didn't put it in the ground. I know yours is a lot, like yours is like heated and a little bit more secure in there than my makeshift greenhouse. But I'd love to hear how that works out because I also have, actually, there's some fig trees in the back there.
Okay.
I have them too, but I bring them in the winter.
And how do they produce in those pots there?
They do well. They do well. But I'm not getting like a large harvest off of them. I'm only getting like just a handful for us, me and the kids to snack on at come harvest time. So, but they're easy to propagate, so I can make more and more of them whenever I want to. And this one kind of got away from me. That's why it's in the corner there, and I'll just keep cutting off of it and making more little plants so I can train it to go how I want it to go instead of like that.
Well, that's a whole nother art form too. It's something I had to learn a lot about in my greenhouse was shaping plants, right? And cutting them and all that other kind of stuff. And then you get into that, you can do splicing and that. Like, because I was just kind of messing around with stuff in the dome and I had tomato plants that were growing so big and they were indeterminates. I had like parts where like it grew so big it basically fell over and part of it snapped off. And I thought, just for kicks, I'm like, I bet you I could probably just put that in the ground. And then you plant that in the ground, that thing just turns into a new plant. And you look at your tomato plants. Go ahead.
No, sorry. That's just another thing about how we were talking about earlier about knowing where you can plant beside what, based on the space and stuff. With indeterminate tomato plants, they can easily get away from you and grow massive. But if you're on them and you're keeping your eye on them, like I only plant my indeterminate tomato plants a foot apart from each other. And because I only plant them a foot apart, I make sure I really keep them really nice and trimmed up at the bottoms, take off all those suckers so they can only stay on that main stem. And that way I can plant a hell of a lot in a small area. So.
Well, I think that's one of the problems I had because I don't know. I guess I haven't learned that yet, really. Where I'm trying to train those tomato plants, I was trying to like take some of the suckers that were low because I wanted to encourage that growth up and I wanted to keep it to more of a main stem, but I ended up always having like these 3 or 4 kind of. It
happens
stems.
Really fast.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I was planting my plants a little more like probably 18 inches apart, roughly. And even then, they were really like growing up into each other. So I mean, I must imagine like you must be really. Is there like a sort of a period up to where you got to be really on top of them, and then you can kind of relax on them a little bit, or you got to be constantly on them?
Yeah, no, definitely. You can relax on them once they start flowering or fruiting, putting their fruit out a little bit. But I have some good tutorials on showing you what the main stem looks like and where you can trim. So I can definitely share those with you. So because I don't know, I find it's just so much easier like visually to see it. And until you do it, it really does feel like you're like killing your whole tomato plant, but in reality you're actually making it so much stronger. So it's crazy to see like how much you can actually pull off the plant. Like if you're like, I've been gone for like a week and come back, I'm like, oh my god, how am I going to get in here? And like I'm taking off suckers that already have fruit growing on them, but if I take that whole branch off, then the rest of it's going to just keep growing and I'm going to get much bigger, better fruit that's going to ripen before I have to pull them before frost comes. So there's like a give and take where it's hard to sacrifice the green that's already growing, but in the long run, it is going to be better and more beneficial for that plant. So
yeah, like even in our first year, we were like, no, the plant needs to stay intact. We want it all to be there. Why would we take stuff away? But really, you got to do a lot of that for the plant to really strive.
Well, and that's what it kind of made me want to ask too is like, so let's say I got like the dome there where I have the benefit of having like a longer season. So I'm not as worried about frost. I can go into November, right?
Yeah.
So like when I'm trimming the plant, how do I maximize like say the fruit production that I'm going to get? Because in my way of thinking, if I have like, say, more suckers in a way that develop more potential fruit-bearing branches on an indeterminate, I'm going to get more fruit? Or is that kind of the wrong way to think about it? Like you want to have certain branches produce heavier, sort of, so to speak.
Yeah, it is and it isn't. It's kind of it's tough for me. Like I'm growing the tomatoes that I grow in my greenhouse, I still prune them the same way that I do the ones that are not in the greenhouse, but they'll just continue to produce even after the ones in the open garden I've already pulled, right? So, but then there's staking involved, or like I just put like kind of like a string in the ground and let them kind of wrap up the string, but then they kind of start to move all through, so they get a little bit taller, but they will continue to produce as long as they can. They won't stop producing. So if you can, for me, I would still pull off all those suckers unless I missed one and they really split twice. Then I'll leave a little Y split once in a while. But other than that, I'm still pulling off those suckers, and I get so many tomatoes.
Well,
So-
I'll have to check out your video about the main stem and all that kind of thing, because I think that's where maybe I was pulling off suckers, but I wasn't really keeping that main stem. And then I was kind of giving myself more trimming and more problems to do later on. And then also, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Especially because you have that greenhouse. If you're pulling off suckers, like you said, you can just plop them right in the ground right beside them too, and then get more. That's so nice to be able to do that, to have that extended season.
Well, I wonder if that's not a bad idea too when I start thinking about trimming the plants there this year, if I wouldn't cut off some suckers and plant them the odd place. Because we planted, like how I mentioned, we planted things a little further apart. We planted with mind of having things further apart again this year. We're also focusing on doing a lot more different varieties. Like I think we have some tomatillos, we have some bigger tomatoes, we have, and we did 3 or 4 different kinds of peppers.
4 or 5, I think.
4 or 5 different kinds of peppers. So the dome, that's what we're going to try to use that for more of, more kind of like oddball, bright colors, more heat tolerant. Because that's the other thing too. It's so hot in there.
Yes.
But yeah, that's what I was thinking is maybe that's what I'll try to do, is like try to repurpose some of those suckers and replant them, because then I can maybe fill out that space a little bit more. Because that's the trick with the dome, is I want it to be full and I want it to grow as much as possible, but I also don't want to like crowd things out and suffocate anything.
Yeah. So when I'm growing my tomatoes, by the end of not the end of the season, but there's like a good, I don't know, 4-5 feet that's just stem by the end, right? Because you've already pulled off all the other tomatoes that have grown. So there's all that space underneath, and I know they still need their root, but if you can kind of if you're planting them 18 feet apart, you can put one in front of the, like in a triangle kind of thing, like in front of there, like a sucker, and then that one is going to grow a little bit later than the ones that have already gone and put off their long, like they're already 5-6 feet in the air kind of thing.
Right.
And then this one can kind of, I don't know, that's just me. I would try to do that to see what would happen.
Well, that makes a lot more sense, because like I'm thinking how you're talking about having it manicured. If it was like that, I could see having a lot more space in there, because like you're saying, the canopy is so much higher up, and the way that the dome sits in there, I would have access to a lot of that light. So maybe that's what I'll try to do, is I'll try to trim as much as that low canopy as possible, and then transfer some of those suckers into that lower canopy and interspace them a little bit more, because I think it's as good. It's good too, also to have as much roots in the ground as possible, as often as possible, right?
Yeah. And again, any leaves that are below your lowest hanging fruit, get rid of them. You don't need them, right? So that helps with a lot of airflow too, and it helps keep things, so you don't end up getting any mold or any mildew or anything in there. So that's kind of contributes to it. Literally just looks like a long stem all the way up to when the first fruit is there. So so that makes it a lot more open, and it doesn't feel as jungly when you're in there.
And then that kind of reminds me, I mean, I guess they're not totally related, but powdery mildew. So what do you do about that, or do you just kind of accept the fact that like you're gonna get it and just try to grow
Yeah.
around it? Because
Yeah,
I
pretty
found
much.
the stuff that we like to grow, it just seems like we're gonna get it at some point. I do
Yeah.
worry sometimes about having stuff in the yard that's prone to powdery mildew, and then having cannabis in the same yard. I don't know how much they transfer or any of that kind of thing. But yeah, like our cucumbers, despite the fact they had the powdery mildew, we still got a pretty good harvest. It's just it seemed to kill our zucchinis. Like they didn't produce very well at all.
Yeah, my zucchini gets powdery mildew pretty much every year by the end of the season. And I this year I had some on my peas as well, and I do get it in my cannabis as well. So I've tried a few things. I've tried using, God, I can't even remember now. It's a sulfur. It's a sulfur, and it's like it's just a powder that you can spray on it. And I find it does help, but you have to continuously apply it, which makes it a lot of work when you have a good amount of plants growing. I've also tried milk diluted with water, and that does help as well too. But for the most part, it's tough. It's tough, and like I get it on my bee balm too every year. It's just there's some plants that just it kind of comes hand in hand with it. So keeping everything as like even with my zucchini and my cucumbers, if your vine for your cucumber goes, I don't know, 2 feet long until you get your first cucumber, I'm pulling off everything before that cucumber fruit, right? So there's no chance for it to jump from leaf to leaf. And yeah, at first onset of seeing it, I try and get rid of them, but you still have to keep some leaves. They still need some photosynthesis in order to grow. So it's kind of a crappy thing, powdery mildew.
Well, that's interesting too, because with my cucumbers, I've never really trimmed them as much. I only started really trimming them when I had powdery mildew, and I was mostly getting rid of the affected stuff when I had it. And it sounds like maybe with your way of thinking there, I could have been on it a little bit earlier and probably prevented it spreading a little bit later on. Like it's really just it's prevention. It's just kind of to slow it down is what you're trying to do.
Yeah,
So
even
your cucumbers, you're trimming the leaves on the lower part. So it seems like a rule: if it's below the fruit, you want to get rid of all those leaves.
Yeah, like for me, that's just that I've always done that in my mind. Like if it's not doing like it, I want the energy from the roots to go to the fruit, right? So if there's stuff in the way to get there, it's going to disperse that energy to everything else along the way. So if there's nothing else for that energy to get from the root to the fruit, then it can go right to the fruit, right? It makes it a little bit of an easier path. So I like to. That's just kind of my.
I never thought of it. That
thinking
makes
on
like
it.
really like as you were saying it, I'm like, well, yeah, because it goes up to there, and there's this
Yeah.
thing here that needs energy, so it's like, well, you need to put energy
Gotta
there.
share it, yeah.
Exactly. Like because
Yeah.
for some reason in my head, I kept thinking like, oh well, if I have these leaves are helping the plant photosynthesize,
And they
more.
do.
Right. So I was
They
thinking
do.
like,
We need them too. We still need leaves, but the ones that are like low to the ground, they're not even seeing light anyway, so they're actually working even harder to get energy to them, right? Because they're not getting as much sunlight because they're tucked under everything else. So by getting rid of them, it's sad, but getting rid of them really helps the rest of the plant.
well, they're effectively like a solar panel for the plant that's no longer being a solar panel. It's just
Exactly.
sort of an energy suck.
Well, because now they
Right.
put out more solar panels up top, so
Yeah.
now they can get those ones a lot better and utilize their power a lot better. So
Right. So, okay. So that makes sense then. So I guess I'll want to remember that this year, that I want to keep the top part of my canopy, that I can leave that, let that get light. That's great. I want to keep the bottom open to maximize my airflow, to maximize the production to the actual fruit. And then I can also maybe get the secondary effect of planting another lower lying canopy, which is great because now I'm sort of doing a succession or a companion planting on top of that. So that's a valuable way of thinking about that right there.
yeah, so like normally, when I was saying let's just talk about like a regular 4x4 square foot bed, right? For me, I'm planting in the center of that bed, so in the 4 square feet in front, in the middle, or the sorry, there's a block of 4 in the middle of that square foot bed that I'm planting pole beans. Okay, so I'm putting like a teepee up in the middle so I can run those pole beans in the middle, and then around the entire bed I'm planting my tomatoes, because I can grow them really tall, and then once they need staking, I can just clip them to the pole beans, right? And that way they'll be able to be supported, but they can still grow with the pole beans. Pole beans grow a little bit faster than the tomatoes do, so they've already made their way to the top, and they've already started putting out their flowers by the time my tomatoes are getting up there. But then now the whole bottom of that bed is open, basically, because everything's pushed itself up, and we've taken off all the bottom leaves, or they've started to fall off, which happens a lot with beans, pole beans as well. And then that around there, that's where I'm putting like marigolds or like nasturtiums or something that is like a beneficial pollinator plant or something like that, that only grows so like a smaller, not a crackerjack marigold or anything, but like a smaller, bushier kind of plant that you can grow kind of in between all of those little spots where it's going to be open now. And then by planting like that too, it's really hard for weeds to grow. So like I don't really have to do a lot of weeding. I mean, in the beginning, yes, you do when it's a new bed, because you still have a lot of stuff that's coming from before, and you know, in your soil and whatever. But for me, I'm not wasting a lot of my time doing weeding. There's nothing there, because there's no space for them to even compete. There's so much other beneficial product growing that they kind of have to take a hike. So,
well, I mean, that's the right way to think about it, because that that weed there, what it's trying to do is it's just using excess. It can thrive there because there's something for it to thrive on. Mm-hmm. And so if you look at that, you think, oh, well, I don't want weeds, but I want something that will help me a little more, a beneficial pollinator or whatever the case might be. Yeah, you put that there. Now that weed that wants the same food, there's not as much as that food there. So now, you don't have to worry about it. And You can still have that big sort of everything all filled in with all kinds of growth, but it'd be the growth you want, not the growth you don't want.
Yeah.
That's what you don't want to have as a gardener too. You got enough work. You don't want to be out there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's one thing I don't want to have to do.
What do you do for fertilizer?
I use compost. I have my own for my chickens and my ducks, but I do always end up getting like a truckload from the local compost facility here as well. And that's just what I mix in. I mix it in the spring, and if I can, I mix it in the fall too. But sometimes I run out of time. So, but yeah, I'm just mixing that in at least once a season to make
sure. So
for
the summer, you're not adding anything.
No, unless it's my cannabis or if, there's nothing else that I'm really doing. I don't think. I'm trying to think. No.
Yeah, because with us this year, we tried using a little bit of like a fish-based fertilizer this year. And I was using that with the cannabis, and I was feeding that every couple of weeks. I read the label first, and I was feeding it hardly ever at all. And then, oh, wow, I could really be feeding this a lot more. So
that's a good one to feed them.
We'll get on top of that a little bit more with feeding the rest of the beds. But so you mentioned feeding the cannabis to lots, especially when it's in flower. With people who have, like, say, synthetic fertilizers, I know a lot of times they'll talk about, like, they'll finish them and they'll do, like, kind of a flush. If you're you don't have to do any of that, I guess, probably if you're using more of a biological. Or do you have any worry about contaminating the flavor?
No, I don't do any of that. I don't do flushing or starving or anything like that. I feed them. I use banana peels at their flowering phase. Because they're really high in potassium. Mm-hmm. And I feed them, I can't even remember now. Oh, molasses. I feed them a lot of molasses. It all comes back to me once I'm actually in the garden doing it. But right now I'm like, what do I do? But but yeah, so I feed them right up until I decide to pull them. I don't, like we talked about earlier, I don't really keep track of when they're supposed to finish, the actual day they're supposed to finish or anything like that. I'm just kind of going by what they look like and if I got time to do it today. So yeah, I don't worry about any of the flushing.
So then, when it comes to feeding, how often are you feeding them in that last flower period? And are you feeding them a lot more in the flower period than you do in the veg, or is it roughly the same, like kind of throughout?
It's pretty similar. In the veg phase, I'm feeding them like nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. But then as soon as they start to flower, I pull all the nitrogen and mostly all the phosphorus out as well. I'm just feeding them potassium, a little bit of phosphorus as well, but mostly potassium for them to finish up. The nitrogen is going to make them grow. I don't want them to grow anymore. I want them to put all their energy into flowering. So that's why I kibosh the nitrogen.
And so nitrogen is going to give you a lot more of that green development. So if we wanted to parallel that again to say other plants, when you're in the vegetative stage, say growing your tomatoes or anything else, you want them to get big and healthy. That's where you really want that nitrogen. And maybe the parallel we could continue on from the cannabis is you want to have more of that potassium probably in the fruiting stage. And with nitrogen, potassium, and what's the other one? NPK.
Phosphorus. Phosphorus is better for like a root development. So those ones are really good too. It's always really good to have phosphorus in there, because the problem too is if you feed them too much nitrogen, if like say you feed your tomatoes too much nitrogen, they might just keep growing and growing and growing and not actually start to flower because they just think that they need to keep growing taller and taller and putting out more and more green. But there's not enough like phosphorus, potassium and other micronutrients for them to be like, oh, I should start putting out flowers and putting out fruit, right? So I've had lots of actually people like that happens with like squashes a lot when people fertilize with nitrogen, or pumpkins, but pumpkins are also such a heavy feeder. It's got to feed them all the time.
So you can almost screw up the fruiting cycle of your plant with too much nitrogen because it encourages more of the vegetative production. And I'm thinking now too, when I was feeding the tomatoes in the dome, when we were feeding them a little bit, because I had like killed them with frost and then killed them with bugs, and then I was pouring fertilizer on the fire because what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so anyways, I noticed for a while, it seemed like, I was going in there and trimming leaves all the time. And I wasn't really getting a whole lot of fruiting. And then I kind of stopped feeding them, and then the fruit started coming.
Yeah. Nitrogen can kind of have that, like everything. There's one benefit for it, but there's also something that might not be so good. So there's always this give and take.
And that's why now I'm thinking, when I looked at my fertilizer, I noticed that the one fertilizer had a lot of the nitrogen and the phosphorus in it, but it didn't have really much of the potassium. Then the other formula was like all potassium and none of the other stuff. And me, again, big gardener brain, I'm like, well, it all needs to be up. It all needs to be
the higher the better. Yeah.
Put all the numbers in there and just doubled up the dose and mix it in there.
Yeah. That's why the fish emulsion one is actually really good too, because it's like kind of it's like, I think it's like a 5-3-2 or something. It's pretty like average across the board. Same with like, you can buy chicken like manure pellets that are actually really, really good too. They're not too strong, but they do a really good job. So those are some good ones as well. But yeah, you'll notice like when you're looking, especially for cannabis too, you'll see ones that are high in the nitrogen and then lower. And then as you get into flowering phase, they're high potassium and lower in the nitrogen.
And you mentioned too that you use a lot of your own compost, and you also use your chicken and your ducks there. When it comes to say like nitrogen or phosphorus content and that kind of thing, so what sort of a breakup do you get in that? Do you have to be mindful of that? Like, is it high in nitrogen, high in potassium?
It's a general. It's pretty similar to like the fish emulsion one. It's not too high in either one. So it's a good overall. It's a good overall fertilizer. It's really good to have them, even though they eat in my garden. They're still really good.
Looks like you have lots of fun with your chickens.
I do. I do. They definitely make me laugh every day.
Are you more in a rural area there?
I live in a neighborhood, but I'm out in the west end of the city. So I live like really close to the airport. I don't know if you're familiar with the area, but like Lake Superior is literally like a 2-3 minute drive from my house. So like it's right there. So it's the area around here is very rural, but just where I am situated, it's a little neighborhood, which is really great for the kids because it's nice and safe. There's no fast cars. It's full of kids, so it's good for them.
Yeah. I was thinking more about the fertilizer. When you're using like a natural fertilizer, I've heard people talk about the synthetic ones. They'll talk about nutrient burn. That's probably, do you have to worry about that at all with the biological ones? Like say if I use a bunch of my fish fertilizer, my emulsion, do I have to worry about really oversaturating or at least killing them?
I haven't had a problem with that. I have burned before my cannabis using too much bone meal or too much blood meal. But in the case that you notice that happening, you can fix it. You just have to flush the plant with water, keep flushing it. And they'll come, you'll lose a few leaves, but it'll come back. And you can tell because the tips of the leaves, have you seen it before? The tips of the leaves start to burn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but I haven't noticed it with with like the fish fertilizer or chicken manure fertilizer, just with when I'm putting in, because the bone meal and the blood meal, those are like just phosphorus or just nitrogen, right? So they're a lot higher and a lot stronger.
Right. Yeah. So like that's where I guess you got to be really, when you're dealing with that high dose there, right? That's where you're going to get the burn.
Yeah. Sometimes bigger isn't always better. Yeah. It'd be nice, but sometimes it can come back to haunt you.
Well, yeah, it would make things simpler for sure, right? If you just add more, just add more.
Yeah.
Because like that's one of the things that I sort of learned to appreciate with the sort of the cannabis thing. And, I kind of wonder how much of an effect cannabis growing's actually had on horticulture in general. Because when you think about, like, especially in the days where people were doing like guerrilla grows and they were growing it illegally and all these kinds of things and producing, like, for all the years that it was illegal, it was never stopped. It was
never illegal?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you wouldn't know.
This is a plant.
Yeah. I mean, but like I think about like just hydroponics alone. That might be something right there that may not really have as much utility today or be thought about as much today if it wasn't for cannabis. It was really kind of these, and you're talking about self-taught, right? And it's sort of funny, at least to me, it's funny because the stereotype you're going to think of is you're going to have someone who's not very intelligent because they're a criminal, and then also they're involved with drugs, so you're going to say they're also not intelligent. Yeah. Then the funny irony is you talk to like one of these stoners, right? And they have this super complicated like hydroponic setup, and the nutrients are all balanced. Like all of a sudden they're like Dexter in their laboratory, right? Like, yeah. And I don't know, I don't know how all people feel about cannabis, but like for me, I like how well it goes with gardening. Like I just, it sort of dispels a lot of these sort of stereotypes. Like there's an art form to it. It's a craft kind of a thing, but it's so much of a science, and there's so much of gardening enthusiasm. I think that kind of comes from our friendly friend there. I can't talk.
I absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I don't like grow like it. And besides all of that, it's a huge pollinator. I get so many pollinators to my cannabis plants, like more than my actual plants in the garden. They love them. So with all that aside, it's amazing. And thank you for saying that too, because it's not easy to grow. Anyone can grow it. It's not it to grow really good. It's tough. It's a tough, and it requires a lot of persistence and a lot of dedication to get a good grow, right? So I can see a lot of people growing it, and realizing how much work goes into harvest alone, right? So, especially when you didn't, it's going to be, your harvest is going to be a lot tougher because you didn't manage your plant earlier or something like that, right? So these are all things that we learn as we continue to grow them. But I use a lot of the information that I've taught myself from growing cannabis on my actual garden, and vice versa. So it goes both ways. Like there's so much transferable skill and so much knowledge that can go either way. So I mean, cannabis is basically just like another tomato. So,
well, that's kind of funny enough. That's how they would oftentimes be referred to in the circles when you were trying to be on the DL and you were growing tomatoes in your closet. Yeah, you weren't growing tomatoes, but they have basically a similar pH level. There's a lot of similar sort of principles when it comes to and popping them and all that kind of stuff. So they were natural companion plants, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
But,
so we're gonna start wrapping up. Before
oh my God, I could talk to you forever.
This has been
We're gardening friends.
Yeah, exactly. So before we end it, it's getting to the time where a lot of us are going to start our seeds indoors. Can you give us a bit of tips on doing that?
Yeah. So actually, I just posted today. I'm a little behind because it's just been such a crazy February already. January is like 400 days, but February feels like it's only 4. So it's crazy how it works like that. So I just posted today what I started planting already. I just started them about a week ago, but there's no rush. We can put them in any time now. I've started onions, leeks, celery. I started my loofah gourds that I grow. I've also started artichokes. And then any like perennial herbs that are like a woodier herb, like lavender, rosemary, thyme, also lovage too. That's very similar to celery. And then for flowers, the only flowers that I've started so far are Lisianthus, which is new for me this year. So we'll see how that works. And my canna lilies. I'm starting them from seed, so they take a long time because they're not really supposed to be grown here. I think that's it. I think that's all. Oh, and peppers. Oh my God, peppers. So for Zone 4B, I always start my peppers in February. I started them in March before. You still get growth, you just don't get as much. So I always find that starting them in February gives them a good start. Hot and sweet peppers, I start them both.
Okay. So that's great because I know that's what we're thinking about doing here right away is we're going to start planting our peppers right away. And we're really excited this year to see how that's all going to turn out.
Yeah.
And so if anyone wants to get a hold of your seeds or wants to look at your page or wants to see what you're doing, how are they going to see where you are and see what you're selling?
Yeah, so I'm the Superior Gardener. And on it's a play on words. It's a pun. I don't think I'm actually it just worked out really well because I live so close to Superior, see? So it on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, I'm at the Superior Gardener. And my seed shop is the www.thesuperiorgardener.ca. I ship to all Canada, all USA. It's $5 shipping. And I added like 66 new varieties this year. I'm still, like I said, I'm still harvesting. So I still have a few things that I'm trying to get up there before we have to start planting again. But yeah, there's lots up there now. There's definitely over 150 varieties of vegetable, herb, and flower seed up there. So yeah, it's definitely worth it to check it out. Everything on the website. The pictures are from my own garden. And I'm always here on social media to help people out. So, when people reach out and say, show me your method on your water setup for your chickens, I'll eventually get to it. I'll get a video together for you guys. So that's kind of what I do.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. It was a great conversation, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you again for this. It was great to chat with you guys.